Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our cook along today. My name is Claire, and
Hi,
this is
I'm Alice.
Excellent. And we are going to be doing
We're doing a traditional tiramisu, so we're doing this in the authentic Italian way. Hopefully, should be delicious, but there's a good reason we're doing an authentic tiramisu.
Yeah, we're an Italian company, and if you were to take a look at our heritage, we are all about food, not just the appliances. Just the region that we're based in is in fact the northern part of Italy, described as the breadbasket. And it was the family's passion for food and their skill in engineering that led to the brand that is Smeg today. So it was only fitting, along with many of our other cook-alongs, that we share with you one of those authentic recipes, which is this tiramisu. So what is a tiramisu, Alice?
So a tiramisu is a layered dessert. It's quite simplistic in ingredients. Really, we've got some lovely sponge fingers, which you can either purchase or make yourself. We'll be talking through a little bit about that later. We've got mascarpone, some eggs, and a bit of chocolate, and some sugar, of course, but essentially that's pretty much it. It's all in the making of the tiramisu. So the equipment that you use and the time it takes to get that beautiful, fluffy end result. And it ends up being a lovely layered dessert of all of these different ingredients, almost like a lasagna in dessert format, essentially.
Nice description, and happens to be one of my favourites. So pretty pleased to be doing this today. Now, I know from the chat that some of you are cooking along today. So by all means, put any questions that you may have in the chat, but we will also be putting all of the ingredients and all of the method, if you require a reminder, of course, and you're not cooking along, so that you can do this real time, or perhaps you can come back and you can play and pause and do this in your own time.
Yeah.
Okay, so we should get started, I think.
We should. Now, one ingredient that I actually didn't mention there, which is pretty much the key ingredient, coffee. So tiramisu actually translates directly to pick-me-up. So it's a really nice way of having a delicious kind of sugary kick along with that kick of caffeine as well, because we are in fact going to be starting off the recipe by making 5 shots of fresh espresso. So we're fortunate enough here to have 2 beautiful Smeg coffee machines. So if you do have a coffee machine at home, get it going, turn it on, and start brewing those 5 espressos. We're going to start over here. So I'm going to be using this bean cup machine here. This fabulous machine does it all for me, from the grinding of the beans to the pulling through of the coffee as well, and it all measures it out perfectly for me. So I'm going to do a long espresso, so a little bit more water than just going to be a single chocolate espresso. We want all of that lovely flavour, but also enough liquid to absorb into our sponge fingers.
So we heard this machine doing the grinding, and now it's doing the brewing process. The other machine that we're going to use, just to show you a couple of the options, is here our espresso machine. So this one doesn't actually grind the beans for you, but relies on you popping in some ground coffee into this tamp just here. So I've got a little scoop, I'm going to pop it in and then repeat virtually what Alice has done, but I'm at stage 2 of the process because, of course, Alice had her machine grind the beans for her. Now, if you haven't got a coffee machine, there's a great alternative, isn't there? And some of us will just have this in their cupboard.
Absolutely. So if you don't have your coffee machine at home, I would recommend getting some instant coffee. Do about 3 teaspoons worth of strong instant coffee and add about 40 millilitres to that of boiling water. And you should get a really lovely, strong mocha espresso from that. And that's what we're looking for. We want the intensity of coffee, but we also want that volume of liquid. So you can see here, I've placed this straight into a dish. We want it wide enough that it disperses that heat quite quickly, but also so we can pop our sponge fingers in there later with ease and start flicking them around.
So perfect for dunking. But yeah, we have literally got our 5 shots of espresso, because you've done a double shot, I've done a long shot here, and that's it good to go. But not just have we got the coffee going in here, but we have also got a very key ingredient to the traditional tiramisu, and that is Marsala. So Marsala is a traditional wine. It's fortified, this one for 24 months. And the beauty is it's going to give us that lovely kick. Now, you don't necessarily have to use Marsala because, of course, it's not something we'll use regularly in cooking, and it seems a shame to buy a big bottle just for this purpose. But if you've got any form of fortified wine, it works beautifully. It's really that sweet intensity that we're after. And I know we were discussing, Alice, earlier, weren't we, that you could even use some alternative liqueurs to kind of go slightly off-piste off the traditional tiramisu, but to add a different dimension and flavour.
Yeah, I mean, if you've ever made espresso martinis, you'll probably have Kahlua at home, which is a delicious coffee liqueur. But equally, you could use mead if you have some of that in the fridge or in a pantry, for example. Claire, you found some other lovely alcohol that you can use in it as well, didn't you?
Yeah, so I think it's one of those things, I know today we're teaching you how to make the traditional tiramisu, but it's one of those ones where I think in the own country, you're a little bit more flexible to mix up those flavours from the traditional. Someone suggested amaretto. What a great suggestion. But only at the weekend, I did a bit of a twist and I did a banana tiramisu and I used rum in mine. But yeah, I liken it to, right now, being Easter hot cross buns in the UK. You can buy every flavour of hot cross bun, but everywhere else in the world, they probably think it's crazy that you're playing with the traditional. It's the same with the tiramisu. They play with it in Italy all the time.
They do indeed. So we've started off with this to give this enough time to cool, because obviously we've got lovely hot coffee in here. I've just put in 2 tablespoons of that Marsala wine, and that's going to mingle together, and then, it smells delicious.
Smells so good.
Here. And then once that's cooled, we'll get to the rest of this later.
Brilliant. So the next steps for us is to start preparing the creamy element of the mixture. And as I said, this is the traditional version. So we are going to be using a raw egg mixture, and we're going to be starting off by splitting the egg whites and the egg yolks, because they do need to be whisked separately.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got some top tips about this, because there are a couple of things you need to bear in mind when we're dealing with the eggs. Firstly, of course, we'll cover off splitting them and the best ways you can separate. But we must stress the importance of having a really nice clean bowl for whisking your egg whites. There needs to be no grease or any fat in that bowl, otherwise they won't whisk properly. So make sure it's really nice and clean, and you should be absolutely good to go.
And I've got a good tip for that, actually. So just to make double sure, what you can do is you can just take something as simple as a halved lemon, and you can just run that around the edges of the bowl, because that acidity will cut through any grease that might be there. But the key thing is to start off with it being nice and fresh. Now, Alice is going to do this really carefully, because one of the other key elements to making sure that you get a really good whisked egg white is to make sure that you get no additional fats. We mentioned about the importance of the fat in the bowl, but of course the egg yolk is fat as itself. So we need to be super, super careful of making sure that we don't allow any of that to make its way into the egg white bowl. Now, Alice has just used the traditional method of eggs and separating and cracking them on the side, but there's all sorts of methods. One where you can allow it to run through your hand. I would suggest we do that now, but then we've got to run off and wash our hands.
I'll do that now, because my hand has got a little bit
you're going to go
of
for it.
anyway.
I love this, the maverick behaviour.
I know. One nice tip that I do have for separating the eggs and not breaking into that yolk, as Claire was just mentioning, is hitting the bowl slightly above the central point, and that way you're less likely to go directly into the yolk. So just slightly above, and then I'm going to allow the whites to fall into the bowl, and then once they're in, use my hand just to strain off any of those straggling whites that are in there, and then you've got your yolk ready to go in, and it's perfectly separated, and you're less likely to split the yolk by doing it in that method, because it's more gentle than using the shell.
Great. And so we're going for 3 eggs today?
4 eggs.
4 eggs. So I'll let you crack on. Sorry, that happened. I'm sorry. But we'll go 4 eggs. But check out lots of different methods of cracking your eggs and splitting them into 2. I've even seen ones where people use plastic bottles to literally open up the entire egg and then use the bottle with the air pushed out of it by squeezing it and then releasing it to suck the egg yolk up. I'm not sure how practical that is in actual practice, and whether it's just a great Instagram trick.
Try though.
It's a good one. Now we're using medium eggs, so if you're going large you might want to just go down to the 3. It's not an exact science with the tiramisu, so don't panic too much, but the key thing is you've got a good volume there, so if they are smaller you would you need to go down this route that we've got here. Okay, so we're going to do 2 things with these eggs. We're going to whisk the egg whites, and we're going to whisk those to a stiff peak, and then with the egg yolks, this is forming our custard, we're going to be adding, and remind me, it's 100 grams of sugar, isn't it?
100 grams.
100 grams of sugar into our egg yolks. Now the sugar I'm using here is in fact a caster sugar. Now the caster sugar is important. You can get different types, as you probably know. You can get granulated, but it just doesn't dissolve particularly well when you're whisking it into the yolk mixture. If you haven't got caster sugar to hand, it's just granulated that you've got, pop it into a hand blender, a food processor, and just blitz it for a couple of goes, and that should give you that slightly more refined texture. If not, you're going to have to keep on going and going and going until you create what you're going to see here is this beautiful, thick, pale, creamy, and ribbon-like texture.
Yeah, and whilst we're going to be using some equipment today, you can absolutely do this by hand. It will just take a bit more elbow grease to get to this result that we're going to do in just a few minutes. So Claire is going to start off by using this lovely hand mixer with whisk attachments. So nice and lightweight, so Claire can hold this without a problem for as long as we need. And that should take roughly about 3 to 5 minutes. So the consistency we're looking for is lovely ribbons, pale and fluffy.
Are you happy for me to get going?
Please do. Okay, so I'm going to now add my bowl into the basic stand mixer. So one key tip when we're cooking, or I should say when we're whisking egg whites, is make sure you go up to the highest speed straight away. So I'm going to pop down my stand mixer head, take it straight up to the top speed and allow it to do its work. The reason we want to go to the highest speed is because we want as much air into that mixture as possible. So we'll see it gain volume really quickly.
And I think when it comes to winning the race, you will certainly win the race when it comes to those egg whites. Now, I've just got this on a medium setting of setting 5. I am going to increase it. And Alice did mention to you it's about 3 to 5 minutes. The beauty of this product here is it actually tells you how long you've been whisking for. So if you're like us and we're multitasking, you can just literally look down and check on the top display. Now, already you can see the colour of the egg yolks changing. So you can see they were that nice, rich, dark colour. Now they're going to this creamy, very pale colour, which is what we're after. And what we're going to try and see, and I'm going to stop just now just to see whether we're getting the ribbons. Now, there is a little bit of it, but I think we should go a bit longer. Now, a question has come through, Alice.
Yeah, so what are we whisking with the sugar? So in Claire's bowl, we've got 4 egg yolks mixed with 100 grams of caster sugar. And then in this bowl over here, we've got egg whites. So 4 egg whites, and again, whisking until they're really nice and fluffy. So my egg whites are actually looking really nice on there. So I'm going to give them a little test. I'm sure you all know the test for the egg whites. We want stiff peak, so when we bring that up, it's nice and firm. And of course, the classic, if I hold it over my head.
Oh, here she goes. That was a bit quick.
So I can see there that these are moving if I do that. So if I held it over my head for any longer,
disaster would strike.
Which means they're not quite there. So I'm going to pop these back in momentarily because this won't take long at all. It'll be pretty much seconds for it to get up to that fully whisked consistency. But Claire, there is such a thing as over whisking.
There is. It's a very fine line because the moment you over whisk an egg white, you actually start to break down the protein because essentially this is a protein. You get to that point and then you'll start to see the loose egg white redeveloping at the very bottom of the bowl. So, keep an eye on it and use that test that Alice has just mentioned, very gingerly at first, as we just did, to make sure that it is there and ready. And I think they look pretty good now.
I think that is there. And So I think we've just had a question about the LED screen on the hand mixer, and yeah, there is an LED screen that tells you when it's on, what setting you're on, and how long you've been whisking for, which is really quite nice.
I don't think you can see it.
Especially if you're doing something like kneading dough,
that way.
it tells you exactly how long you've been going for, which is really rather handy.
Yeah. And if we can have a look at that camera as well, you can see there are my ribbons that are creating really nicely on the top. So both are ready, and I can just pop out my blades just with a little device on the side here.
Perfect.
Move that out of the way.
I'm feeling confident. Woo!
She was very good. You can go whoop, everybody. I mean, that is confidence for you.
You've got to give it a go, haven't you?
Yep, you do indeed.
We've got the nicely whisked egg whites, and the purpose of this is we're going to get a beautiful, fluffy, light consistency of this beautiful creamy sauce. So the next step is actually getting the mascarpone involved. And the top tip here would be work the mascarpone before you add it into the mixture. If you've got it out of the fridge, allow it to come up to room temperature before you use it, because again, that will stop it from being too stiff at this point. So this is 500 grams of mascarpone cheese, which essentially that is 2 tubs worth. So if you're getting them from the supermarket, usually they come in about 250.
Yeah, so there's no wastage then, is it? Which is definitely a key one. So you're going to put that first of all into which mixture?
I'm going to pop this straight into here, into the yolks and sugar mix. And we're going to make sure that's really nice and combined. And the reason we're doing that in this order is because if we were to add those egg whites in first, and then the mascarpone.
It's too heavy, isn't it? It breaks it down.
Exactly.
Okay, so we'll start combining those. Now, this is probably a really good time to discuss this particular recipe, because it is a raw egg mix. And we know for sure that for some people, consuming raw eggs in any form, so those that are pregnant, vulnerable, immunosuppressed young people, it may not be an option. Now, I think it was quite some time ago now in the UK and in Europe that there was the pasteurization of eggs as a standard procedure for most eggs that you purchase. Now, we can't speak for every egg that is sold on the market, but just to reassure you, the risk of salmonella now from a raw egg is very, very minimal. Now, that is UK, Europe. Worldwide, they don't have necessarily the same procedures in place. So do be careful in checking that out. So the pasteurized eggs gets rid of any of that risk of salmonella. So we can go with this no problem. However, if you are in a situation where you really don't want to take that risk, then you don't have to go down necessarily this route. What you could do is you could take those egg yolks with the sugar to the same consistency, and then rather than using mascarpone, maybe take some cream and infuse the eggs with the sugar in the cream on a very low heat on the hob, almost making a custard. Evidently, you would let it cool before doing anything with the assembly of the tiramisu, but you would start to create a very similar creamy mixture. But of course, you're not going to get this lovely light aeration where we add in the egg whites, which gives it that super light, almost very, very gentle mouthfeel that you get from that tiramisu.
Yeah, absolutely. And a really nice alternative recipe to the one Claire's used there is I make a really quick one with mascarpone cheese and condensed milk. So 2 tubs of mascarpone and about 3 to 4 tablespoons of condensed milk. Delicious.
And does that mean that there is actually some of that left? So you can just finish it off?
There is indeed. So about 3/4 of a tin of the condensed milk left at the end. So could have a little spoonful when you're done.
Apologies, but I think I'm taking preference to that recipe. Okay, right.
So we're up to a really good stage with our recipe here, because what we're going to do now is we're going to start folding in the egg whites.
Should we just show everyone what that looks like now? It looks, you can see, really thick, very voluminous, with the mascarpone and the whipped together egg yolks and sugar. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the egg whites, and very similarly, although Alice, you did put most of the mascarpone in one go, didn't you? But with this, we're just going to take a little bit at a time and incorporate that first of all, and then start introducing the further egg whites. Now, the folding in method is there so that you don't, in fact, break down all that air that Alice has spent the time incorporating. Now, there's a difference between stirring and folding, and the folding is literally almost like a figure of 8 motion, or some people were a big swoop round and a cut through in the middle. But you just keep going until you see all those little lumps of the egg whites disappear. And then you can start introducing the rest of the mixture. Now we're doing this in a glass bowl. And that's another good one, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Again, making sure your glass bowl is really nice and clean, but the benefit of doing it in a glass bowl is you can see to the bottom of the bowl to make sure everything is being combined, so you don't have big lumps of your egg whites just mingling in the base. So Claire's adding in a really good amount of the next batch, and doing it in goes helps the mixture to absorb it, essentially. If you put all of that in one go, it would actually take a really long time to kind of take in that egg white, and therefore you'd knock out a lot of that air that we gained through the mixing process. So while Claire finishes off that process of folding in the egg whites, I'm actually going to start with our sponge fingers. So my mixture is pretty much cool at this point, so it's a really good temperature to get started with. We need to select a dish for your tiramisu. I'm going for this dish here, which is a rectangular dish. Now, traditionally in Italy,
it was round, wasn't it?
They were round, yeah, which is a really interesting fact. And they've now changed to being traditionally now in a rectangular dish. And I suppose that's for easy serving, so you can portion out.
There's no fighting, is it? Who gets the biggest portion?
Exactly. So what we're going to do here is grab our sponge fingers. So you can do one of two things here. You can pre-purchase sponge fingers, or they might be called Ladyfingers, and they look a little bit like this. They're quite dry, nice and snappable, and they actually have a sugar coating on the top, and you can purchase these from any major supermarket. Alternatively, we do actually have here our very own homemade sponge fingers by Claire, very kindly. And she made these ones in particular a couple of days ago. And that's just to ensure that they go a little bit stale and dry out a little bit, because you don't want these to be too fresh, because we don't want them going soggy when they absorb this lovely coffee mixture. We want them to still have a little bit of bite. And the benefit of this is that you don't have that added sugar, unlike the pre-bought versions that you can see here. And that shape really is quite different.
And you can make them to your own shapes as well. And, you know, when I made them, the beauty is that you can keep them for at least 3 days, like Alice has mentioned, but you can also freeze them for up to 6 months. So again, you know, we talked about tiramisu being a really simple, straightforward dessert, but it's only as simple as the ingredients you've got to hand. So it could be that they're just a case of getting them out of the freezer, leaving them for a couple of hours, and away you go. Someone has been so lucky and had their sponge fingers made for them this morning. That is amazing. Wow. Now, let me talk you through the recipe that I did. And again, we'll pop this into the chat. And I wonder if the lady whose mum made, or gent, whose mum made the sponge fingers this morning had a similar recipe. It does follow a similar method to actually what we have done today. So you would whisk the egg whites separately, you would combine the eggs and the sugar, but this time it's granulated sugar, and that gives you a slightly more kind of dense texture. But you also add a little bit of extra egg white into the mix as well. So whereas normally a sponge mixer is, you know, almost the same weight of eggs, butter, sugar, in fact there's no butter in this at all, just your eggs, you've got your sugar, and you've got your flour, and that is it. So your egg whites go in the bowl with an extra egg white. You then whisk your egg yolks and sugar together. Yeah. You fold in, again, the egg yolk mixture into the egg white. And then finally, the most dense ingredient, you would then include your flour. And then I pop mine into a piping bag, and then just pop them onto some greaseproof paper. Literally just 12 to 15 minutes in the oven at about 160 degrees. I think that's what I did it at, but it's going in the chat just to make sure, and very, very straightforward. And they all made it here today. They didn't actually all get eaten, which is great. So
good news.
Yeah.
So I'm actually in the dunking process at the moment. So I'm just taking 2 fingers at a time. If you feel brave enough, feel free to do more than that. But I am popping them in on one side, and then I'm turning twice. So really they should be in there for about 4 seconds at a time. You want them to absorb that coffee mixture, but not go completely soggy and fall apart. I'm then lining them up in the dish, trying to get them as tight together as possible. So if you do need to break a couple up to get them in to fit, absolutely by all means do that. So giving them a good flip around. Now, as you can see here, I'm just squeezing them in. I'm going to break this one in half there to add that in. And you can actually see here how it's got a little bit of sponge left. It hasn't completely soaked through, which is exactly what you're looking for, because all of these lovely liquids that we've got in this tiramisu are going to be soaking into these biscuits. So we want them still to be able to absorb what we have. So I'm just going to really get these in here.
Pack them in.
Pack them in.
And we're going for a 2-layer, aren't we? So this is where you
Yes.
said it's a little bit like a lasagna. You're
Absolutely.
going for your layers.
Yeah.
And I've got my mixture here. So it's really worth portioning out your ingredients at this point, because what we want to make sure is at the end that there is at least a third left, maybe even a little bit more, because that top layer, when we leave it to kind of mature in the fridge, and we'll talk about timings a bit later, you want to make sure there's a slightly thicker layer at the top so that it doesn't then soak into the sponge and then you see the sponge layer coming through. So once again, have a look at my mixture. You see how beautifully the egg whites have been folded in, and it's still very light and airy. So we'll just pop just a small amount to start with, and then very gently, again, we're not wanting to take the air out of the mix. We're just going to very carefully just cover our sponge fingers. I might just take a little bit more, but it's better to go this way than having to take mixture out. And you've got it on that top layer. So make sure they're all covered, because apart from the alcohol, some of it and coffee, this will also soak into our mixture.
Oh, that was beautiful, Claire.
Thank you.
So what I'm going to do now is get started on that top layer. So again, I'm going in with the sponge fingers. Now I like to go the sugar layer on top, because I am using the pre-purchased fingers here, but by all means, you can do it any way you like. So whilst I've gone sugar-coated side upwards, you can do sugar-coated side down to give you maybe a strong base. So I'm lining these up again nice and tightly, because this will ensure that you get some lovely layers when it comes to serving. So when we cut into this, once we've finished, it won't be quite, I would say, as nice and straight lines as it would be if we were to cut into it tomorrow, because the beauty of that waiting period is we get all of those lovely ingredients absorbing and solidifying as well. So I'm just going to keep going. Keep
on going. So that's our second layer being built up. And we haven't mentioned to everybody how long we're going to leave it to mature really and soak before we actually serve, are we?
No.
So this dessert is really, really good because, as I say, you can prepare it well in advance. In fact, it benefits from being prepared in advance because it leads at least 4 to 6 hours in the refrigerator. So for those of you that are preparing it now, this will be perfect for tea time. But in my experience, the best way to do this is to actually make it today for tomorrow, because a 24-hour kind of development of the flavour, the soaking of all those layers together really does give you the best texture and, of course, the best flavour. Now, whilst we're loading these up, it's worth, we've kind of talked about it a little bit with the different alcohols that you might use to really develop what you've got going on in this basic tiramisu recipe. But there's no harm if you wanted to really go crazy. So, for example, the one I made at the weekend was a very simple, straightforward tiramisu. I literally took some mascarpone cheese as well. I took some pre-made custard. So I cheated, pre-made custard. And then I put some salted caramel, or you could use the same as that condensed milk that you mentioned. Pop that all together to create my kind of custard creamy mixture. Took my sponge fingers like this, but I layered it with bananas. So I had like a banoffee, but what did I soak my fingers in? Rum. And that was really, really delicious. And I've seen maybe perhaps for somebody who's not a fan of alcohol, or perhaps a little person, a great one would be doing something with lemon curd and raspberries to give you that real kind of freshness all the way through.
Very nice.
A berry tiramisu. I think in lockdown, actually, we did in fact go down the route of a berry tiramisu, didn't we?
We did indeed. Can you do it without layers? I've just seen the question come through, and absolutely you can. If you wanted to do an almost deconstructed tiramisu, by all means. You've got those lovely, really rich flavours. And whilst, yes, absolutely, the layers help to make it look fantastic and give you a really even distribution of flavours. If you wanted to do something a little bit different, go for it.
And you can certainly, I mean, that if you're not wanting to work on the layers, this is one where it works really well if you were to do it even in a tumbler glass or a smaller little bowl. So you've got individual portions. There's definitely no fighting over how many this would serve. In fact, we haven't mentioned how many this would serve. This particular recipe would serve between 4 to 6 people. Now, people say, what does that mean? Well, I think if you've had a good meal, or perhaps you're greedy, it would be 4. If it's a more kind of what I'd call acceptable pudding portion, you'd be looking at 6, and certainly a lighter meal beforehand. Right, so Alice is nearly on that final layer. I'm also going to do some further preparation, and that is to create some topping for the final layer. Now you can use, can't you, a cocoa powder dusting on the top, but what we're going to do is we're going to go a little bit more decadent, and we are in fact going to use some grated chocolate. And that's only because we have convenience at our hands. We've got everything for food prep, which makes life a lot easier. And we're actually going to use this. This is our stand mixer, but you can get various attachments really. You'll have seen it on our pasta cook along, but you can get pasta attachments. You can also get slicing and grating attachments, and that's what we're using here. So we're going to use the grating attachment to in fact grate some additional chocolate. This is a great fun for everyone to get involved in, because it is so fun when the chocolate starts coming out at the end. I'm going to put it all into the hopper. We'll get a bit of speed onto this, and we're going to whiz it through.
This is the most satisfying. You look at that and you get beautiful shavings. So of course you can do this with cheese, you can do this with vegetables, you can even do this with nuts actually, but gosh, what a thing to do it with a whole load of beautiful high-quality dark chocolate. So while Claire's just finishing that off, I am doing this final layer of lovely creamy custardy mixture on top. And I mean, by all means, if you wanted to, you can actually do more than 2 layers of sponge fingers if you've got some mixture left over. But as Claire mentioned earlier, you might actually be inclined to keep a little bit back. So if you are saving this for tomorrow, you're doing a dinner party, and as we mentioned, for best results, keep it in the fridge for up to 24 hours beforehand to allow that to solidify. You then retop with some of that mixture that it has absorbed and therefore lost.
Okay, so I've got my beautifully grated chocolate here. I've already made a bit of mess on the work surface. So I'm going to try not to make any more mess, but we're just going to just sprinkle over that lovely grated chocolate. And that's that contrast, isn't it? Flavours, textures, bitter, sweet, smooth, creamy, that will give us, let's see if we can get right up to the edges. I don't want anyone complaining that they haven't got enough chocolate on the edge of that tiramisu.
It's a really decadent yet light dessert because of that amazing amount of air that we've incorporated during that whisking of the egg stage. It tastes almost like a light summery dessert, but having one of these lovely rich flavours to complement it too.
And I believe it's actually made itself into at least the top 10 of desserts in the whole world. Yet this dessert recipe was only really found in cookery books in the 70s, 1970s. You know, read up on it and you'll see that some people say that it was way back in the 1700s, but it wasn't documented until that final 1970s time. So a relatively new dessert as well.
Pretty much, yeah. So I don't know about you, but I think we should maybe give it a little taste test.
This is naughty, but I think we should just check for your own benefit. Oh, chocolate wants to add some too, to make sure it does taste good. Now, whilst Alice is serving, I just wanted to allude you to some of the other content that you can find on our YouTube channel. So this is just one of the many cook-alongs that we have done and will do in the future. So famously, we've done a pizza, a pasta, a risotto, and also recently a gnocchi. So again, like this one, it's a cook along, but they're there for playback on the YouTube channel. So do go and check those out. You'll also see that there's some additional recipe videos that you can find with Theo Randall. the Michelin-starred chef who is famous for his Italian cookery and has a restaurant in Mayfair. There's some fun content on there, actually. Last summer, Alice and I went on a tour, and we did the tour of the south of Britain, and we actually explored things like the cream tea, the Bath bun, the Chelsea bun, the Cornish pasty. So if you want to learn a little bit about the heritage of that food and learn how to make it from scratch, again, those recipes exist. Now, we've got a beautiful piece which I will be interrupted for us to try. And please tell me that you've got more than one fork there for us to...
Claire, I absolutely have.
Oh my goodness, for a moment I thought it was all over then.
So hopefully you can see some of these lovely layers. And again, once this has time to really settle and firm up in the fridge, those will be even more defined, because you'd have that beautiful light colour, that fluffy, creamy mixture, and then the lovely coffee-soaked sponge fingers underneath.
I'm going to go in first so that we can still both keep talking, because we've made that mistake before, haven't we?
We have, and we've been stood in silence whilst both chomping away. What do you think, Claire?
It's terrible. No, it's really, really tasty. And at the moment, there's still definition between those layers, but it's so incredibly light. And I think that's the difference between making that raw egg custard with the folded in egg whites that makes a big, big difference compared to that banoffee one I made at the weekend with just pre-made custard and mascarpone. It was quite heavy. So this is one of our favourite recipes when it comes to dessert, for sure. So, of course, as I said, check out the recipes and the other videos that we've got on our YouTube. What I'd also say is that if you do have a Smeg appliance already and you want to get more out of it, Alice and I have created some videos as well for you to learn how to use the appliances more. Perhaps you're even, checking out doing a new kitchen, and that's why you've joined our cook along today. And we do these demonstrations, don't we, in person actually, that you can join too.
Yeah, and it would be great if you could join us. We're going to pop the link in the chat for you to book onto one of those courses. You can just visit the Smeg UK website, and we've got everything from our live cookery demonstrations all the way up to in-person events where you can get hands-on with the products and ask questions yourself.
And those are called Experience Smeg. So, yeah, we'd hope to see you in the future for one of those. But thank you very much, everybody. It's important to us, as I'm sure, that we get your feedback from these sessions. So if you wouldn't mind leaving us a review on Trustpilot, again, we'll pop that link in the description or in the chat box for you. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you'd like to see in the future. And in fact, if you want to put some of your pictures of your creations today, tag us in on Instagram,
yes,
which is, remind me of the handle?
It's at Smeg_UK.
Brilliant. So we hope you've enjoyed today. We've certainly enjoyed it. We're going to continue enjoying our day with demolishing this tiramisu. But thank you very much for joining us. Tucking in for some more.
Oh, I absolutely am.